Hi, and welcome to another episode of Queer, Black, and Awkward. I'm your host, Orion, and what I do on this podcast is I interview people that are in the LGBTQ community, and, I just ask them a bunch of questions, maybe topics that you talk, amongst friends. I try to bring it up in a podcast format. Hopefully it'll be entertaining for you or you'll learn something. Either or is fine with me. So on this day's episode I have with me is Sade. You can introduce yourself to the world.
I didn't expect this. Hi, I'm Sade. I use they, them pronouns. Agreed to come on the show and I'm just excited to be here. Yeah, that's that's all I had to say. Yeah.
So what do you do in life? What are your passions? What are your goals?
Goals. That's helpful. I guess we met through a small business that I help run called Queer Supply, and we sell queer apparel and like queer art that we make mainly in our bedrooms. The tagline was like queer craft and art that we make in our bedrooms, and it's all handmade stuff. Just through the kind of a lot of tradition around like queer folks kind of making and not getting a lot of like ability to just like make things outside of just like DIYing it and having to just like make it yourself and having to just kind of like use whatever tools you can afford to do. So we sell like shirts that my my friend makes in their bedroom, and like I'll make some crafts and stuff, and we do all of the marketing and the website stuff and the social media from like our house basically. So that's what I do now, and I would say a goal in terms of like something that I like to do like more so than my day-to-day job, which is like a really good job. I really like my retail job, but not really wanting to do the 9-to-5 thing, but my main income is like 9-to-5 retail work, and I work in a small sex toy store in the downtown kind of area. So it's like more interesting and more queer than like the average job. So in a lot of ways I like that element of it, but don't like 9-to-5, and I don't always like retail, and customers are mean, and I don't want to deal with that all the time.
Customer service is a bust.
Really shows you the evilness of human being. It really shows a different side of people. You go in thinking like 10 years ago when I started doing customer service, I was like, I like people, this is gonna be fine. I don't like people, and it wasn't fine. I don't want to.
For sure.
Yeah.
I feel the same way about customer service. But you gotta do what you gotta do.
Just gotta make rent, yeah.
So also what I do before I start diving into today's topic, I just ask my guests what's their mood and their color. So I can go first. Mm-hmm. The mood that I'm in currently is content, and my color would be white.
Okay.
So what's your mood and color?
What does the color just whatever color comes to mind?
Yeah, like a color that you feel or you identify in this moment.
In this moment. Okay, that's helpful. Like a mood ring situation.
Yeah.
Okay. Right now my mood is also pretty content. I am I thought I was going to be nervous because I've never been on a podcast before, but I find myself just being content, but very like aware that a new thing is happening. So a little bit like up. And my color right now would be lavender. A lavender. Yeah.
Lavender.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love the smell of lavender. It smells so good.
Lavender's amazing. Have you ever had a lavender tea?
Oh.
A lavender, like a tea made of lavender?
Yes.
Yeah, that'll change your life.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
It knocks me out. That's what it does. But it's so good. It tasted so good, but I'm like dead.
Just asleep after.
Yeah.
Awesome afterwards. I have to wake up early tomorrow. So that's a good thought.
Yeah. So in today's topic, what I'm going to be talking about is navigating the world when you're Black, female, presenting to the world, and queer, and all of those identities together, and how can that all coexist together and in harmony, basically.
Yeah.
So, my first question I would ask you is, it's like pretty evident that there's this certain kind of box or this image that's Western society, because that's the society we live in. So we're going to be talking about Western society. Yeah. How Western society has for Black female presenting bodies or people. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed those stereotypes or beauty standards that they have for people in that category,
in that box,
in that box, that label? Have you struggled with living up to that, or struggling, like noticing around you that some people can get away with certain stuff and you can't? Like, explain to me
what that looks like.
Yeah,
I think definitely. Yeah, the answer is yes. Yeah, I think this, as with many people, it's definitely like, I think pretty quickly, if people perceive you as a Black woman, or if you are a Black woman, there's a level of there's a lot of different, I guess, like layers to it. Of you are both very. For myself at least, like I grew up, I was always in predominantly white spaces, and the experience of someone who is not in that situation would probably be very different or slightly different in some way. But for me, there was both this mixture of being very sexualized, or very kind of like just kind of seen as just like the parts of my body that were kind of connected to Black womanhood, and like the sense of like, and the sexualized parts of myself that were kind of connected to that were very noticed by in creepy ways or in derogatory ways by either people making fun of them, like especially like white classmates stuff, making fun of parts of my body that were seen as more like Black or connected to Blackness and Black womanhood. But then also there was this level of like, and for me the femme element comes from like, even though I'm not a Black woman, I do identify as like a Black femme, and I do enjoy I guess like the femme as an identity. And so in that way, there's a level of like, even in queer spaces, there is a sense of like, there's a standard of beauty as to what a femme would be like, or what femme kind of looks like. And even before I even was able to understand what femme was, or like it was before I even understood like my own queerness or what queerness was, there was this standard of beauty for women, and Black women was not part of that. And when I was younger, a lot of that played into more of the typical kind of like, I want to be pretty like these girls, but I'm never going to look like that. And the older that I've gotten, that's changed just based on not really identifying as a woman anymore, and like not really being in like cis straight spaces as much anymore. That also kind of like changes it. But I think even in queer spaces, there's similar patterns, even though I think we like to think of ourselves as like outside of like the cis straight kind of like idea of what is beautiful and what is normal, and like what different roles should be. We do definitely have elements of that in our day-to-day life as queer people. And so I think that like when I've started going more into queerness, I found similar things of, there is a standard of beauty within queer spaces, and Black people are not that. Like generally I find that that's kind of not it's usually very much connected to whiteness. So I think, yeah, that's kind of what I found. It's been a constant struggle. But also I think that when you're not always in something, or you're not always accepted into a space as like the most desired or the most like whatever you want, whatever that desire would be, is even if it's to be like, I want to be seen as like a very femme person, or I want to be seen as like a desirable person. When you're kind of used to, in a lot of ways, not getting that, you kind of you're forced to find self-acceptance in other ways. So in a lot of ways, I think being put in that box leads you to just kind of like just accepting yourself and accepting like you as desirable to you. And that kind of, I just noticed that you skip or not you skip a lot of it, but you kind of like don't take in, or you're not as like affected by, or at least I'm not as affected by feeling like I have to fit into a certain standard. And also in a lot of ways I do fit a certain standard, so it's not a sense of like everything is racially based. Like there are levels of like the way your body looks, like like ableism plays into that. There's a lot of different like factors. I'm not saying like I'm the most marginalized or I've dealt with the most things, but more of like when you are not seen as desired in certain spaces and you have to kind of get used to that, it leads you to a space of more like having to accept yourself, which I feel like is a little bit easier than having to accept what other people say about you or think about you.
Yeah, very true. So you're not originally from Toronto, right?
Yeah.
So, because I do my research, you know, when I invite people on, I read on the website on Queer Supply, it says that you're originally from Johannesburg, right?
Yeah.
So you lived there for quite some time. Can you like kind of describe or what you have noticed, like the beauty standards for, you know, female presenting bodies in Johannesburg versus like North America, in America or Canada's views? Can compare those two and what you've noticed
between the two? Yeah, it's weird in a lot of ways. One thing that I think is just was helpful for me in general was because there's just so many Black people in Johannesburg that when I was living, I was born in the States originally, and that's kind of where a lot of the predominantly white spaces situation came from. When I moved to Johannesburg, was still in some ways in a lot of predominantly white spaces, because I would say South Africa is one of the whiter countries in Africa as like a continent, but there's just way more Black people there. So even just like, especially when you're younger and you're kind of going through that space of like needing to see yourself in things, it was a lot easier because there's just so many Black people there, and by extension there's more Black people in the media, there's more Black people on TV. The standard, when you look at like advertisements and things, like there are especially for like kind of like people who are identify as women or like or like who are seen as women, because they're both kind of often put in the same box and deal with the same levels of dealing with, or like kind of having to live up to this standard. I kind of found that like there was just more Black women in TV and on movies and starring in things, so that was really helpful in a lot of ways. But what was weird I found was that like even though like I think in South Africa it's like maybe 60 or 70% of the population is Black, that when you look at the media and advertisements, even though there are more Black women and Black people in general in in South Africa, it's still not as much as you would think. It's still very white for the amount of white people that live there. So really, no matter where I went, which was interesting, I never really escaped that sense of like whiteness is the standard. Like in South Africa, especially with like apartheid and like the levels of racial hierarchy and racial conflict that happened there specifically, there's just whiteness is definitely seen as the highest kind of standard of beauty. The lighter your skin is kind of like also dictates how well you'll do in your career and things like that. So even though there's more Blackness and Blackness is more accepted because there's just more Black people, it's definitely still controlled by whiteness in a lot of ways. And that also comes across in like products, like the products that they sell there. There's like a lot of like skin lightening products. They're often kind of seen as like, oh, even your skin tone, but it's kind of just like a bleaching product that will like kind of lighten your whole skin overall. So it's kind of weird because it's kind of mixed in with this kind of sense of like, there's a lot more Black people here. So you would think that Blackness would be seen as more desirable, but I found that it was kind of it was the same in a lot of ways. It was slightly different, but that same underlying sense of like whiteness is the standard was definitely there.
That really is interesting, because you would think that because, you know, it's African, there's predominantly more Black people there, that you would kind of escape that. But
yeah, that's what
the moment there's one white person that that like pulls up down the street and lives next to you. It changes the whole world.
Everyone's like, oh wow, okay, I guess this person gets to be on TV now. Like it's just everything changes, and it doesn't even. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't take that many people. There's not. I think it's like I think of it in percentages, just because that was often what I was told in school in South Africa was like, this is the percentage of these people. But I think there's like very small, like 10 to 20% of South Africa. And yeah, still they have tons of leading roles on a lot of the major leading soap operas there. When you're driving and you see a lot of advertisements, you do see more Black people, but like there's a lot of white people there too, and often it's in a television show where there's like a star. The star might be Black, but there's a very good chance the star will be white also, and which is weird, compared thinking about how few white people are there. Yeah, yeah.
It's like they're tokenized, but in a good way.
Yeah.
It's like you could be tokenized and still...
You're still you're not a token like you're a sidekick. You're the token like you're one of the only white people on this show, but you're still the star for some reason. Yeah.
Exactly. So the world has like this certain kind of expectation that they have for like Black femme bodies. Did you notice a shift in, I don't know, if when you started to embrace your queerness more? And I don't know if it showed in your clothes or how you express yourself, but when you started to embrace your queerness more, did you start to see things around you or people change or how they receive you, or in terms of like jobs? Maybe like kind of explain if there was a change in your surroundings or how you present or how the world receives you. You can expand on that.
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think I've only more recently started to show both my queerness and my not like, I guess, non-binary identity through my clothes pretty recently. I do notice, I guess, even though what I would tell people that, I guess an example in my mind is kind of like being approached, I think before, or like by like men, generally cis men, in kind of a more like trying to hit on you kind of way. I think that's just the thing that happens. It's a more consistent thing that I can see has changed since I've maybe like shown, or like through my dress and stuff have kind of like not been as 100% looking like not being as femme presenting, like not be like sometimes being more masculine in my dress, or like not not conforming to certain ways of like being seen as a Black woman in like society. As I've kind of moved more away from that, I think there's still the level of like attention is still there, or the unwanted attention. Like before I started kind of dressing in the way that I kind of wanted to dress more, as opposed to just kind of like dressing the way I thought a Black woman would dress, or like a woman would dress in general. People like approach you in certain ways that are uncomfortable, and there's like kind of like street harassment kind of things. But I think when I started kind of being more queer in my dress, it's come across as more like that's still there, but it's more like kind of like, why are you dressing like that? It's kind of more of a question, and sometimes the question feels a little bit like kind of just like kind of like it's kind of like disgust, or like not so much disgust, but just kind of being like, why are you dressing like that? Like, why do you look like that? Or like, you have a beautiful body, why are you hiding it like that? Like things like that kind of come across as like they're not being like openly aggressive about it, but there's an underlying hint of like, what the fuck is wrong with you, or why are you doing that it was not there before. Like before it was annoying, like I still didn't like it when people approached me, but there was never this level of like, why the fuck are you doing that? It was just kind of like someone would approach you and you'd be like, oh, I have to go, and then I would leave, but it would always be kind of like positive, like, how are you doing, or like, you look really beautiful, or like things like that. But it was generally more positive, but not because it was a positive experience, because it wasn't this underlying feeling of like, hey, I'm approaching you, but also like, why do you look like that? I don't know, kind of thing. Yeah. So I kind of do it on days where I feel like I have more energy. Like I'll present myself more in the way that I would be comfortable with on certain days because I have more energy. But if I don't have the energy to put up with it, or if I know I'm going to be like walking like home or like things like that, I'll just kind of try to stick to what people think, I guess, a Black woman would look like, because I just don't want to deal with all of the comments, I guess. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you were pointing out like the way men interact with you changing is very true. Because like, if you guys don't know, I'm trans, and when I was like presenting as female, at one point I was expressing myself like, you know, fitting the box, being feminine, doing my hair every 2 weeks, and like nails, dressing, and all of that, like being like hyper feminine. And then to see how older men would react to that, and then to see how more I started to embrace like my queerness, how less men would like, you know, like cat call me on the street. I just say it's weird, you know, what men say when you like walk by, when a female walks by, and they yell out like unnecessary, inappropriate things. Slow down so much to the point where I never got anything, and then people would start to mistake me for a guy, and the way they would treat like someone, like a Black female that's fitting all the boxes compared to me, like they would treat me less than, just because I don't live up to their standards. So it was like pretty interesting to see that. Have you experienced an experience like that where you were in a situation with someone, you know, they're Black female presenting, and they fit all the box? Well, maybe that day you look a little more queer, you know, or something, like your queerness is showing, and something happens in that situation, but whatever the outcome, like they had a better outcome. Have you been in that situation with a person?
Yeah, I think the sense of seeing that's, and it's interesting because it's like the sense of like the outcome would be, the outcome is better if you just kind of fit into that box. And that's kind of why I just tend to like to just go along with it, or on days when I don't have like the energy to kind of deal with it, I'll just kind of be like, whatever, I'll just put this like thing on. And there is a level of like, I do genuinely enjoy things like putting on makeup, for example. Like I tend to do like very intense makeup, and I will like, it takes a long time, so I don't do it every day, but it's something that like I do enjoy and will lean into. So in that way, there's elements of the way I when I feel comfortable that do fit into that box, like they do kind of fit into that kind of ideal. And because there's that pronounced difference of like the days when I don't do that and the days when I do see that just kind of like, I guess the comparison would be myself in that situation. Basically what you're saying is the days where I will do that, the response is like, when I said positive, I wasn't so much being like, it's a great experience, but it's better, because there's not that level of like dismissiveness from men on the street, like that, and it's like a sense of being like, they're there, and it kind of sucks that you have to play into that depending on how they kind of feel, but it's like they're there and like you have to deal with them. So on the days where I am more like kind of fitting into that box, the responses are more positive, and even if you ignore them, generally it's kind of, it's not great. People do like kind of turn, but it's not this weird need to, there's an ignoringness from what based on what your story was kind of being like, people are not saying things, or like kind of like doing that same cat call thing that they were doing before. But there's also this like weird like dismissiveness, and sometimes people will just like, even if they don't say anything, they'll kind of stare, or is it opens up like they notice you. It's not because they're not saying anything because they didn't notice you. It's just because that they're trying to convey a sense of like, I see you and I don't like it, and that's just, it's more difficult to deal with, I think. Yeah.
I feel like in a moment in time, because Western society, as far as I know, it's not set up for people that are not white to win. So you notice that pretty earlier on in your life. So for you growing up, when was that moment where that switched to where you started to, stop feeding into that stereotype and, you know, start embracing who you are, because the Black female form comes in all, you know, different shapes and sizes, and they have to fit into this box, that stereotypical box. Can you explain to me, when did you reach that enlightenment, and how long did it take you, and the process and all of that?
Yeah, it took me a really long time. And I think the thing that kind of made me kind of realize like this isn't working is kind of, I think when you grow up, or my experience growing up in predominantly white spaces is there's a level, especially when you're very young and you don't really understand how the world works, is kind of like, if I just kind of do all of the things that I'm supposed to do, like if I fit into the box and I make myself smaller and I kind of like try to play into whiteness, that I can just make it work, or I can somehow like delete racism from my life if I just do all of these things. Like if I and part of that was kind of performing into the gender roles, kind of like just make yourself as not noticeable as possible, just make yourself as close to what people expect as possible, but also kind of like cater to white people and like kind of play into whiteness and do all of this stuff for white people. And I think the moment of kind of like me being like, I'm just gonna do my own thing, was being like, that's not how it works. Like at some point I kind of realized like you're Black no matter what. No, nothing you do is going to protect you from the difficulty of racism, and realizing that sometimes people will look at you and they'll just never really not only accept you, but they'll view you as less than human. And I think that's what, when you're a kid, you're trying to fight that, because in your head you want things to be ideal. You want to believe that like, if I just work hard enough. And then it also plays into Blackness of like, I think Black people are often told like, if you worked harder, or if you didn't do this thing, or if you had done this thing, then you would be able to, then you wouldn't like be in the situation, or you wouldn't have no money, or you wouldn't have gotten shot, or like you would, if you had done more, then you could do these things. And I think that message, even though it has different intensities based on the situation, is kind of always underlying. And I think when you're very young, you kind of find it difficult to fight that. And I think the older that I got, the more I realized like, no, it doesn't matter what you do. You can do all of these things the way that you think it's supposed to be. You can fit into this Black woman box if you want to, but it's not going to protect you. Mm-hmm. And so why are you, like, it doesn't make sense for you to fit into this box that makes you feel unhappy if it's not even giving you anything, if there's not even like protection that comes from that. And really maybe the best thing to do is accept yourself the way that you are. And if people don't like it, or people view you as lesser than because of it, then it's like, you know, it is what it is. You can't do that. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people have story. I don't know if you have like a situation where that happened for you as well, like where you kind of, I don't know if there was a moment where you kind of like started to be like, I'm not going to fit into this box anymore just for the sake of it. But I feel like there's always a level of kind of realizing that it's like, no matter what I do, this is just always going to be the case. So it doesn't make any sense to make myself unhappy, stress myself out mm-hmm. for all these people in the world that don't care about you. So yeah.
It really is true. Like, I had that point like maybe like five years ago. Not that long ago, but yeah, it took me longer, because self-love, like, I feel like what I have seen in the media is just, if you're not hard, like, if you're no if you're Black and you're female presenting, you have to have like this tough exterior, like I can handle anything, I don't have any emotions, I'm just a brick wall, and that can take on anything that throws at them, which is true. But you, like every other person, you guys have feelings.
Yeah.
You know, you're a human being, there's blood pumping through their veins, like,
it makes sense that you can't just always be like, yeah, that person who is just like nothing will ever get to me and I'll always be fine, and I'm gonna also like I'm gonna take on everyone else around me and like support them, but never really think about myself. Like all of that stuff is like, that makes sense as a movie character. It doesn't make sense as a movie character, but as a movie character you can see, and it's like, well, that's a movie, but like real people can't. It's just hard to live like that. Mm-hmm. You can't do that all the time.
Exactly. And I feel like it's a conversation that is important to have with your kid, that I feel like not a lot of parents have that conversation. I don't know if your parents talk to you about that, but there's always that certain kind of like, you have that talk in your household, like how to behave in public, you know, like how to conduct yourself, to not bring so much attention, because you're bringing attention enough because you're black. Like, you don't need to do anything else. Don't have to be too extra.
Just tone everything else down as much as you can, just to protect yourself. Yeah.
So that's pretty interesting that that's something that a lot of families don't talk about. It's like how the world, they tell you how to protect yourself from how to have this, they teach you how to build this guard up, but they don't tell you the source or why we have to go through certain things, because there's certain like obstacles or opportunities that we need to work just a little bit more harder for, or you know, like addressing like the root of the problem rather than like around it, like what has been built upon that lie, and what we've like through generations been telling each other because of like colonization or stuff that were given to us. But now we're slowly realizing that it's not, you know, it's not a concept, or certain ideas were just said or put into motion to get this result, so they can benefit off of this, rather than it actually benefiting the community and building each other up. So that's something when I've learned that's when I've learned the truth about, I can just be myself, just express who you are.
And it's, if you need to have that protection for yourself, like that's real. And I think what you were saying around like your parents, like I think most, like my parents had that. I think most black parents have that conversation around like, you're black, so you just have to work 3 times harder, or like you'll just have to like do this stuff. And I think as like in terms of like being effective, I understand why black parents do that. They and why it's kind of very like to the point like that, because it's like, if you don't tell your kid that, they're going to go around thinking that they have the same like rights and like the same things that all these other white kids have, and they don't. So you have to tell them early, and you have to kind of like let them know so that they can start protecting themselves in a lot of ways. But then I think you're right when you don't give that context of like, but the reason that you have to do this is not because I think sometimes if you don't tell a kid, like, the reason you have to do this is because of racism, it's not because of you. You didn't do anything. It's because of the world you were born into. It kind of leads into the whole, like, having to learn self-love and defeat self-hate, because the self-hate comes from a feeling of, like, if everyone is always telling you just have to work harder, it kind of starts to create this feeling in yourself of, like, I have to work harder because I'm always at a deficit. I'm never going to be enough. Or, like, I'm always, like, in the wrong somehow. Like, you always just kind of feel like I've done something wrong. I should always be working harder to do all of those things. And if you don't give that context of like, the reason that you do have to work harder is not because you did anything, it's because of the world, it kind of falls into, I think, why so many like people who are seen as black women, I think that's what causes so much of the need to be everybody's rock and be everyone's support, but then also the need to always be like, I'm fine, like I'm doing everything, I've got a career and I've got like this going on, and having to have everything is because you are always told that you need to work harder, and that can start to lead into thoughts of like, I'm coming from a place of like, I'm nothing, I have nothing to offer, so I always have to like be filling my life, or like showing people or doing things so that I know and other people know that I actually am good enough. And that can be difficult, and I think that kind of does come from that beginning stage of especially like, I think with black children in general, that's a thing. But I think people who are socialized as women who are black, it's this doubly hard thing of like, not only are you black, but you have to deal with this other element of like, you're not good enough in these ways too, and you have to play into these roles as well. So it's this extra layer of that.
Yeah, for sure. So there's also, it's not a secret that in the job field, when you're in your job, that's where you can visually see and feel the effects of your blackness. In what career do you work in?
Oh, I'm in customer service right now, and it's in a kind of like queer sex toy store, sex education, sex positive kind of space. Yeah.
So over the years, like you've been working in customer service and other jobs that you may have done in the past. Did you notice like the way maybe employees treat you or address you or customers? Or is there like certain things that you needed to like conform or tone down or, you know, to be the good employee?
Yeah.
Like the employee of the month kind of thing. We
How
can
will
put it
I?
like that. To be the employee of the month.
How can we be employee of the month?
I know. I'm speaking from personal experience. I know that in certain jobs, in the past I had to act a certain kind of way or walk a certain kind of way, tone my personality down to fit these kind of spaces in order for it to be deemable, the way my hair is, personal stuff on your body that I feel like sometimes my body doesn't belong to me because there's a lot of things that there's a lot of I just did that. There's a lot of things that the world has an opinion on the way I should present myself to be work worthy.
Yeah.
Have you experienced that as well?
I think that, yeah, definitely in jobs and in the workplace in general, I think there's a pretty fast sense of like you have to kind of fit into like certain things to be seen as like employable and be seen as like a good worker. I think in a lot of ways, like I sound like a white girl, so I feel like that kind of like plays into a sense of like in terms of like phone interviews, I'm fine. Like I feel like any kind of like phone calls, like in my own workplace, like if I'm dealing with like a white customer and I can tell if they saw me, they wouldn't really respond well to me, but like over the phone, golden. Otherwise, I do find that you kind of have to. Yeah, like I've had experiences like with like racist managers. Like I used to work at the Winners. I want to call them out, the Winners at the Stockyards. I'm looking at you, but I feel like I had a lot of experiences at that Winners where there was a manager there, and everybody there was a lot of the staff was pretty diverse, but it was mainly just like black people and white people, like mainly just in terms of like racially. I mean, kind of separated by race. Like the white staff would all hang out with each other, and the black staff would all hang out with each other, and then everybody else would be kind of in the middle or one or the other, depending on how the situation went. But everybody kind of knew, everyone was like, yeah, like this manager is like really racist. Like if you are black and you call her and you're late, she's basically going to tell you just don't even bother coming in. But if a white girl calls and she's like, oh, I'm going to be late, it's always kind of like, well, you know, you have to like, you know, make sure that you write in your schedule on time. Like it was very blatant. And I think that was probably the most overt situation where it's like everybody just knew it, but no one could do anything about it kind of thing, where that was like a thing of like, yeah, like there's just a situation where you're already starting from a place of like, just because when this manager looks at you, she doesn't like you. You're already starting from a place of like not nothing, but like you're starting at a place of like lower, you can't work as well. It's not as easy to just get by because you're under more scrutiny. And customers definitely do that as well. Like I've had a lot of instances where even at more like sex positive or like queer jobs that I've had, if I'm at like the front desk and my white coworkers at the front desk, people tend to look at her first. They tend to kind of focus on her. If I'm interacting with them and they're asking me a lot of in-depth questions and my white coworker like chimes in with something, it becomes a thing of like that customer will just focus on her. I have to work really hard to get them back and believe that I have as much ability or knowledge as she does. So just kind of realizing there's a lot, you just put a lot more work into it. And then, yeah, things with like hair and having to like spaces where there's professional hair, like what does professional hair look like, and what does that mean when people say like, you know, like your hair isn't really professional, maybe you could like change it, or like sometimes people will kind of code it and kind of like maybe you could like deal with it or like wear something, or like, you know, if it's too like out and if it's too afro-y, or even things like braids, like I think people just kind of like maybe tone it down. But there's a lot of having to change that and having to change things. And with customers, like, there's a lot of like offensive remarks. like racist remarks, and having to, on top of the customer service element of just like swallowing down the mean things customers do anyway, with the racism, it's just like having to just like take it in, and you can respond, but it can't be in the way that you want it to be, and just kind of like swallowing that down. And I think if you do that over and over and over again for a period of years, it starts to wear on you a little bit, but it's part of making the job, whatever.
It really is something else that you're going to this work to get money, and then on top of that you have to deal with all of this, right? Like all of these obstacles.
Yeah, but you don't even get paid extra for it.
Yeah, exactly. You're just dealing with extra shit that you're not getting paid for. It's like, well, I think you should pay me to the $1.50 more just because I'm black. Let me tell you.
And they're not gonna do it, but they should. They should,
honestly. So I can keep going on about this subject, but we gotta bring it back. Okay. My last question that I would ask you is, what is a lesson that you have learned that changed your perspective on adulthood and the person that you've become?
I think a lesson that I've learned that has kind of like changed how I am, and probably plays into sense of being like just kind of the whole vibe of do whatever you want that we've been talking about a lot. But I think a sense of nobody is really that together, even if they seem very together and very like everything is fine. And within the like Black femme communities that I hang out with, that plays out, and like people, because of what we've been talking about, needing to be very like feel like they have everything together and needing to feel like they have everything is fine, and like and I'm like really strong and I can do all of that. But part of like the journey back to like loving myself, even if I'm not on top of everything all the time and I'm not like 100%, has come from being like nobody is. And in conversations like this and conversations that I've had with other Black people in situations where they're also dealing with self-love stuff and getting back to a sense of it's okay if I'm not this like on top of everything 100% all of the time, did come from real like seeing people kind of be like, yeah, like I seem like I have everything together, but I don't have everything together. And once I started to realize that, I was like, okay, like the standards are not as high as I thought they were. It doesn't always make me feel less anxious, but it at least is a level of like I can bring myself back and ground myself, and like even if I feel like I've messed up or that I'm not doing well enough in my career or my life or whatever, it's even if I feel that way now, nobody does, and I'll have to kind of start to make myself believe that more, but it kind of helps me ground and guide myself back.
So towards the ending of my podcast, what I like to do is I like to ask my guests a queer awkward moment that happened in their life. It didn't have to be queer. It's just an awkward moment that happened maybe last week, 2 years ago, whenever, it doesn't matter. So I can go first. A queer awkward moment that happened to me today, actually. I had to show my ID to a cashier, and so I was showing it, and it's an old ID. It's like 4 years ago. I had my hair permed. I looked way more feminine. So when I came up to the cash register, the cashier was just like, oh, hey, sir, how's it going? And then obviously I start talking, and then they're like, there's always this moment where they're like, they don't know what to do, like, they just freeze up, like, sir, I'm just like, please don't make this any awkward than it already is. I don't feel like to correct you because you're a stranger and I don't have time for this. So just ring me up.
Just take the ID and give me my stuff.
Yeah, I know. Look at the ID, and then obviously don't look like anything like me currently, how I look like. So yeah, those kind of encounters are always so awkward because it's just like, I'm just here to get what I need to get. I don't need to go through this right now. Just let me live. But yeah, that's an awkward moment that happened.
I think an awkward moment that happened to me, and this is really my fault because I shouldn't have engaged this person, but I remember I was going to U of T at the time, so I was sitting in Queen's Park and I was finishing an essay, and this old white man approached me and he sat down and he was like, just trying to like be, I guess, suave or whatever, and like trying to like hit on me. And I think at that time I was kind of like coming more into queerness. I hadn't really started dealing with gender stuff that much yet, but I was like kind of dealing more with queerness. And I don't know, I just like kind of had it that day, and I was kind of like done, and I was just kind of like, you know, like he said to give me a compliment, and I was like, oh, thank you. I don't, and then I kind of like paused, and then kind of looked around, and I was like, I'm gay. And then I just like looked down at my book, and didn't really respond to him. And then that just led into more awkward conversation because I thought that he would just leave. He did not just leave. And I think that was the realization that like, you can't just, I wanted to have a thing that I can just say and then he'll leave me alone. But that doesn't always happen. And so then that just kind of led into more awkwardness. Later he like texted me and asked about my thoughts on like, I guess like the current state of gay people in Canada in the moment. And at that point I can just not respond. I shouldn't have given my number in the first place. Yeah. That was a very young time, just being like, I don't know what to do. Just leave me alone. Here's my number. Just go away. But yeah, that was the only thing that was like both queer and awkward that I could think of in this moment. A lot of just awkward moments, but queer and awkward is harder to find. It's connected. Yeah.
Those old men, they're really creepy, let me tell you.
In the park. Get out of the park.
The park, I know.
Enjoy the park.
The park is to chill. I don't need to partake in anything else. Thank you very much. It was pretty fun having you on. You're very easy to talk to.
Oh my God, you too.
Thanks. So you can check my podcast out on YouTube and SoundCloud at Queer Black and Awkward, and at Facebook Queer Black and Awkward. You can subscribe to it so you can keep up, whenever the latest episode is out. So thanks for watching and stay awkward.